My name is Caroline Margaret Whitmore. I'm 39 years old, and I'm about to tell you something that will stay with you long after you stop watching this video. At my son's funeral, my husband slapped me. It happened right after my mother-in-law whispered something in his ear. I saw the shift in his eyes before I could even react, and the next moment, his hand connected with my face so hard it sent me crashing to the floor. I lay there, stunned, as mourners gasped, and he turned to walk away like nothing happened, until a slow, quiet laugh escaped my lips. He froze, his face drained of all color. And that's when he realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. But before I tell you what happened next, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the end of this story. The thing about grief is that it strips away all pretense. It leaves you raw, exposed, vulnerable, in ways you never imagined possible. When you're burying your child, you think the worst pain imaginable is the hole in your chest where your heart used to be. You think nothing could hurt more than lowering that tiny casket into the ground. I was wrong. My son Timothy was 7 years old when he died. 7 years, 3 months, and 16 days to be exact. I know because I've counted every single one of those days since the accident. The doctors said it was quick, that he didn't suffer. But those words feel hollow when you're the mother who wasn't there to hold his hand as he took his last breath. The funeral home was packed that Tuesday morning. Timothy was one of those children everyone loved. Bright, funny, kind, in that innocent way only children can be. His teachers came, his classmates' parents, neighbors I barely knew. The whole room smelled of lilies and that artificial air freshener funeral homes use to mask the scent of death and sorrow. I sat in the front row, wearing a black dress I'd bought 3 days earlier because I'd never needed funeral clothes for my own child before. My husband Marcus sat beside me, but we might as well have been on different planets. The space between us felt arctic, unbridgeable. For weeks leading up to this day, Marcus had been different, distant, cold. At first, I thought it was his way of processing grief. Some people withdraw, I told myself. Some people need space to mourn. But there was something else in his eyes when he looked at me, something that made my stomach turn with dread I couldn't name. His mother, Patricia, sat on his other side. She'd flown in from Phoenix the day after the accident, and from the moment she arrived, I felt her watching me, studying me, like she was waiting for something, gathering evidence for a case I didn't know was being built against me. During the service, I tried to focus on the pastor's words about Timothy's beautiful spirit, about how God needed another angel, about finding peace in faith. But all I could think about was how my baby's laugh used to echo through our house on Saturday mornings. How he'd crawl into bed between Marcus and me, his hair still messy from sleep, chattering about dreams and breakfast and whether we could go to the park later. Those Saturday mornings felt like they'd happened in another lifetime, to another woman, in another world where children didn't die and husbands didn't look at their wives like strangers. I could feel eyes on me throughout the entire service. Not just Patricia's calculating gaze, but dozens of others. Neighbors whispering behind hands, family friends exchanging meaningful looks. There was something electric in the air, a tension that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with judgment. When it came time for people to pay their respects at the casket, I watched our community file past my son's still form. Some touched his little hands. Others whispered prayers or pressed flowers between his fingers. My heart broke and mended and broke again with each person who said goodbye to my boy. Marcus stood stiffly beside me during this part, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. When his college friend Jake approached us, offering condolences, Marcus barely acknowledged him. When my sister tried to hug him, he stepped away so quickly she stumbled. But it was when Mrs. Chen from next door came to express her sympathy that I noticed Patricia lean closer to her son. Mrs. Chen was one of those genuinely kind women who'd always waved at Timothy when he rode his bike in our driveway. She was crying as she took my hands. "Caroline, honey, I am so sorry for your loss," she whispered. Timothy was such a joy, such a bright light. I squeezed her hands, grateful for her warmth when everything else felt frozen. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. He loved waving at you from his bike." She smiled through her tears. He always had such a big smile. Always so happy when... She stopped mid-sentence, glancing nervously at Marcus, then at Patricia, then back at me. The warmth in her eyes flickered, replaced by something that looked almost like pity. She finished her condolences quickly and moved away, leaving me confused and more isolated than before. This happened again and again. People would approach with genuine sympathy, then something would shift. A glance toward Marcus or Patricia, a sudden change in tone, a hurried exit. It was like watching people remember something unpleasant mid-conversation, something that made them see me differently. I tried to catch Marcus's eye, to seek some explanation or comfort, but he wouldn't look at me. His mother kept her hand on his arm, whispering things I couldn't hear. And with each whispered word, his posture grew more rigid. The pastor announced it was time for our final moments with Timothy before the burial. Family members lined up for one last private goodbye. I approached my son's casket with legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. Timothy looked peaceful, like he was just sleeping. The funeral director had done a good job. You could barely see the injuries from the accident. His face was serene, his hands folded over his chest holding the small toy car he'd been playing with the morning he died. I'd found it in his pocket at the hospital and couldn't bear to leave it behind. I leaned down and kissed his forehead, whispering promises I should have made while he was alive. Promises to be a better mother, to pay more attention, to not take any moment for granted. The guilt was crushing. If only I'd been watching more carefully. If only I'd made different choices that day. If only. As I straightened up, I felt a presence behind me. Patricia had approached, and was standing so close I could smell her perfume. Something floral and cloying that made my stomach turn. He was such a beautiful boy, she said, but there was something in her tone that didn't match the words. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Such a tragedy, she continued, when children pay for their parents' mistakes. The words hit me like ice water. I turned to face her, but she was already moving away, back to where Marcus stood. I saw her lean up to his ear, saw her lips moving rapidly, urgently. Whatever she was saying, it was having an immediate effect. Conversations pausing as people sensed the shift in energy. The air became thick with anticipation, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. And that's when it happened. Marcus turned from his mother and walked toward me with purpose. His face was a mask of fury I'd never seen before, not even during our worst arguments. People stepped back, creating a circle around us, like spectators at a gladiator match. "How dare you?" he said, his voice low but carrying across the silent room. I stared at him in confusion. "Marcus, what? How dare you stand there and play the grieving mother when this is all your fault?" The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Around us, I heard sharp intakes of breath. Someone's whispered, "Oh my God." But I couldn't process what was happening. Couldn't understand how my husband, Timothy's father, could be saying these things to me at our son's funeral. "I don't understand," I managed to whisper. "Don't you? Don't pretend you don't know exactly what you did." His voice was getting louder, more accusatory. "My mother just told me what really happened that day, what you've been hiding." I looked toward Patricia, who stood behind him with an expression of grim satisfaction. Her arms were crossed, her mouth set in a thin line of righteous indignation. "Marcus, please. I don't know what she told you, but nothing," he exploded. "You killed him. You killed our son with your carelessness, your selfishness, your complete inability to put anyone before yourself." The room had gone completely silent now, except for someone's muffled sobbing. I felt like I was underwater, like his words were coming from very far away. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Not at Timothy's funeral. "That's not true," I said, my voice barely audible. "The accident wasn't what? Wasn't your fault? When you were too busy on your phone to watch him? When you left him alone in the yard so you could gossip with your friends? When you chose your social media over your son's safety?" Each accusation felt like a knife twisting deeper. And the worst part was, I could see people around us nodding, agreeing, like they'd been waiting for someone to say these things out loud. "Marcus, please," I begged. "Not here. Not at his funeral." But he was past hearing reason. His face was red with rage, spittle flying from his mouth as he continued his verbal assault. When? When is the right time to talk about how my wife's negligence killed my son? When is the appropriate moment to discuss how you failed in the most basic duty of a mother? I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller with each word. The room was spinning, faces blurring together in a sea of judgment and condemnation. This was supposed to be about Timothy, about honoring his memory, about saying goodbye to our beautiful boy. Instead, it had become a public execution. And that's when Patricia's whispered poison reached its intended target. Marcus raised his hand and brought it across my face with a crack that echoed through the funeral home like a gunshot. The force of it sent me stumbling backward. My high heels caught on the carpet, and I went down hard, my black dress billowing around me as I hit the floor beside my son's casket. For a moment, the world went completely silent. Even the crying stopped. I lay there on the funeral home carpet, my cheek burning, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. My husband, Timothy's father, had just struck me in front of our dead child, in front of our entire community. I could feel all those eyes on me again, but now they held shock instead of judgment. Someone gasped. A woman whispered, "Oh my God," but no one moved to help me. No one stepped forward to ask if I was okay. Marcus stood over me for a moment, his chest heaving with emotion. Then, apparently satisfied with his public demonstration of righteous anger, he turned and began walking toward the exit. He was done with me, done with this scene, done with the charade of our marriage. His mother followed close behind, her head held high like she'd just witnessed justice being served. And I lay there on the floor, abandoned and humiliated at my own child's funeral. But then something shifted inside me. It started as a small tremor in my chest, a vibration that felt almost like sobbing. But as it rose up through my throat and escaped my lips, I realized it wasn't tears at all. It was laughter, quiet at first, barely audible, but growing stronger, more confident. Not the hysterical laughter of someone having a breakdown, but something else entirely. Something that made Marcus stop dead in his tracks. He turned around slowly, his face already beginning to pale as he registered the sound. Because my laugh wasn't the sound of a broken woman. It wasn't the sound of someone destroyed by his cruelty. It was the sound of someone who knew something he didn't. Someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. I pushed myself up from the floor, smoothing down my dress, my eyes never leaving his face. The laughter continued, soft but unmistakable, filling the silent room with a sound that made people shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Caroline?" Marcus said, and for the first time since the accident, I heard uncertainty in his voice. I didn't answer. I just kept laughing. That quiet, knowing laugh that seemed to drain the color from his face with each passing second. Because what Marcus didn't know, what Patricia didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been expecting this moment for weeks. If you're wondering what I was laughing about, what I knew that they didn't, make sure to hit that like button and tell me in the comments what country you're watching from. Because what happened next changed everything. You see, the thing about being married to someone for 12 years is that you learn to read the signs. You notice when their behavior changes, when they start hiding their phone, when they begin working late more often than usual. You notice when they stop touching you, stop talking to you, stop looking at you like they used to. I'd noticed all of these things in Marcus, but I'd attributed them to grief. We'd just lost our son, after all. People process trauma differently. I gave him space. I gave him time. I gave him every benefit of the doubt a wife could give. But then Patricia arrived. Marcus's mother had never liked me. From the moment we met during our college years, she'd made it clear that I wasn't good enough for her son. Not pretty enough, not smart enough, not wealthy enough, not religious enough. The list of my inadequacies was long and varied, but she'd kept most of her criticisms to subtle digs and backhanded compliments over the years. When Timothy came along, she'd softened somewhat. She adored her grandson, and even I had to admit she was a devoted grandmother. But I always felt her watching, waiting for me to prove her right about my unworthiness. After the accident, her attitude toward me changed completely. The subtle hostility became outright coldness. She would speak to Marcus in hushed tones that stopped when I entered rooms. She would take phone calls from him that lasted hours while I was left alone with my grief. And Marcus was changing too. 3 weeks after Timothy's death, I found him in our home office at 2 in the morning, surrounded by papers I didn't recognize. Legal documents, bank statements, insurance forms. When I asked what he was working on, he quickly shuffled everything into a drawer and told me it was nothing I needed to worry about. That's when I knew something was very wrong. The next day, while Marcus was at work, I called my friend Jessica, who happened to be a paralegal at a family law firm. We met for coffee, and I told her about Marcus's strange behavior, the late-night document sessions, his mother's increased presence in our lives. "Caroline," she said, her expression serious, "I think you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Marcus is planning to leave you." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Leave me? We just lost our son. We need each other more than ever." "Honey," Jessica said gently, "sometimes tragedy brings people together, and sometimes it tears them apart. And if his mother is involved, if there are legal documents..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Has anyone suggested that the accident might have been your fault?" I thought about the whispered conversations, the way Marcus looked at me sometimes, the questions that had come up during the police investigation about where exactly I was when Timothy wandered into the street. There was a moment, I admitted, a few minutes where I was inside getting a drink. Timothy was playing in the backyard, and I thought he was safe. The gate was latched. I don't know how he got out. Jessica nodded sympathetically. "Accidents happen, Caroline. But grief can make people look for someone to blame. And if Patricia has convinced Marcus that you were negligent..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood. That night, after Marcus fell asleep, I went into the home office and found the drawer where he'd hidden the documents. It wasn't locked. He'd never expected me to go looking. What I found made my blood run cold. Divorce papers, already partially filled out. Custody agreements, except there was no child to fight over anymore. Financial statements showing all of our assets, with notations about what was jointly held and what was in Marcus's name only. Insurance documents related to Timothy's death. And at the bottom of the pile, a legal memo from Patricia's lawyer discussing grounds for a negligence lawsuit related to a child's accidental death. They weren't just planning to divorce me. They were planning to destroy me. They were going to blame me for Timothy's death publicly, legally, completely. They were going to take everything I had and leave me with nothing but the crushing weight of false guilt. I sat in that office for hours, reading every document, understanding the full scope of their plan. By the time the sun came up, I knew exactly what I was dealing with, and I decided to fight back. The next day, I called my own lawyer, not Jessica's firm, but someone independent, someone who specialized in family law and personal protection. I told him everything. About the accident, about Marcus's behavior, about the documents I'd found, about Patricia's involvement. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said after reviewing the situation, "what your husband and his mother are planning could constitute conspiracy. The negligence claims are particularly concerning because the police investigation already cleared you of any wrongdoing. If they're planning to pursue false legal claims." "What can I do?" I asked. "Well, first, we document everything. We make copies of those papers he's hiding. We establish a timeline of his behavior since the accident. We gather evidence of your actual whereabouts and actions the day Timothy died. And then we prepare our own case." Over the following weeks, while Marcus and Patricia thought they were building their case against me in secret, I was building my own defense. My lawyer hired a private investigator who interviewed witnesses from the day of the accident. We gathered security camera footage from neighbors that showed exactly what had happened, proving that Timothy's death was a tragic accident that could have happened to any parent. More importantly, we discovered something Patricia and Marcus didn't know I knew. 3 days before Timothy's funeral, the private investigator found evidence that Marcus had been having an affair. Not a recent affair born of grief and confusion, but a relationship that had been going on for almost 2 years. With his assistant, Sarah, a 26-year-old woman who had been sending him increasingly intimate text messages even in the days following our son's death. The text messages were brutal to read. Sarah comforting him about being trapped with me. Marcus complaining about having to pretend to grieve with someone he didn't love anymore. Plans for their future together once he was free from our marriage. And most damning of all, conversations about how Timothy's death was actually perfect timing for their relationship. How my supposed negligence would make the divorce easier, more favorable to Marcus financially. They were celebrating my son's death as an opportunity. By the morning of Timothy's funeral, my lawyer and I had assembled a comprehensive file. Evidence of the affair, documentation of Marcus's planned false accusations, proof of my innocence in Timothy's death, and a clear picture of the conspiracy between Marcus and his mother to destroy me emotionally and financially. We'd also taken some preemptive steps. My lawyer had filed preliminary injunctions to protect our joint assets. He'd contacted Marcus's employer to inform them of the potential legal issues involving their employee. We'd prepared countersuits for defamation, emotional distress, and fraud. Most importantly, we'd arranged for everything to be delivered to Marcus's office, his mother's hotel, and Sarah's apartment immediately following the funeral service. So when I lay on that funeral home floor, my face stinging from my husband's slap, and felt that laughter bubbling up from my chest, I wasn't laughing because I'd lost my mind. I was laughing because I knew what was waiting for them. When Marcus turned around and saw my face, calm, controlled, almost serene despite the red handprint on my cheek, he finally understood that something had gone very wrong with his plan. "Caroline?" he said again, his voice cracking slightly. I stood up slowly, brushing off my dress, my eyes never leaving his face. The entire funeral home was watching us, but I didn't care anymore. This moment had been coming for weeks. "Did you really think I didn't know?" I asked, my voice carrying clearly in the silent room. His face went ashen. "Know what?" "About Sarah. About your plans. About what you and your mother have been plotting." I took a step toward him, and he actually stepped back. "Did you really think I was so stupid, so grief-stricken, so broken by losing our son that I wouldn't notice my husband preparing to destroy me?" I could see Patricia trying to catch his eye, trying to signal him to stop talking, to deny everything. But Marcus was frozen, staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. "I don't know what you're talking about," he managed to whisper. "No? You don't know about the divorce papers hidden in your office? You don't know about the negligence lawsuit your mother's lawyer has been preparing? You don't know about the text messages you've been sending to your girlfriend about how convenient Timothy's death is for your relationship?" The last sentence hit him like a physical blow. Around us, I heard gasps from people who were beginning to understand what they'd just witnessed. Patricia's face had gone chalk white. "How long have you been planning this, Marcus? How long have you been waiting for the right moment to blame me for our son's death so you could run off with Sarah guilt-free?" "That's not," he started, but his voice failed him. "It's not what? Not true? Because I have copies of everything, Marcus. Every text message, every legal document, every piece of your beautiful plan to destroy the woman who loved you, who grieved our son with you, who would have supported you through anything." I could feel the energy in the room shifting. People who had been looking at me with suspicion and judgment were now staring at Marcus with disgust. The narrative he and Patricia had carefully constructed was crumbling in real time. "And the best part," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "is that while you were so busy planning my destruction, I was planning my own defense. By now, copies of everything have been delivered to your office, your mother's hotel, and Sarah's apartment. Your employer knows about your affair and your plans to file false legal claims. The district attorney's office has copies of the evidence showing how you've conspired to commit fraud and defamation." Marcus tried to speak, but no words came out. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in slow motion. "But most importantly," I said, stepping closer to him, "everyone here now knows who you really are. Everyone knows that while I was drowning in grief over our son, you were planning to profit from his death. Everyone knows that you just physically assaulted your wife at your own child's funeral because I wouldn't cooperate with your scheme." The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel the weight of dozens of stares, but now they were directed at Marcus, not me. Patricia was backing toward the exit, clearly realizing that their plan had not just failed but spectacularly backfired. "So when you walk out of here today," I continued, When you go home to pack your things because your lawyer will have already explained that you have no choice but to leave immediately. When you call Sarah to tell her that your perfect plan is ruined, I want you to remember this moment. I paused, letting the words sink in. I want you to remember that I didn't fight back by screaming or crying or begging. I fought back by being smarter than you. I fought back by loving our son enough to protect his memory from your lies. I fought back by refusing to let you turn me into the villain in a story where you're the monster. Marcus finally found his voice, but it came out as barely a whisper. Caroline, please, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I cut him off. I understand that you're a coward who was too weak to ask for a divorce honestly. I understand that you're a man who would exploit his own child's death for personal gain. And I understand that you're someone I should have stopped loving a long time ago. The laugh that escaped me then wasn't quiet or controlled. It was genuinely amused, the sound of someone who had just realized how much better off they were without the person they'd been grieving for. The funniest part is that I was actually going to fight for our marriage, I told him. Even after finding all your paperwork, even after learning about Sarah, I thought maybe we could work through it. I thought maybe you were just processing grief badly, that maybe you still loved me underneath all the pain. I shook my head, still smiling. But then your mother whispered her poison in your ear, and you decided to assault me at our son's funeral, in front of all these people, in front of Timothy. I glanced toward the casket where my little boy lay peaceful and still. You showed me exactly who you are, Marcus. And you know what? I'm grateful. Grateful, he whispered. Grateful that I don't have to spend another day pretending to love someone who could do this to me. Grateful that Timothy won't grow up seeing his father treat his mother this way. Grateful that I learned the truth about you before I wasted any more years of my life. I turned to address the room full of our friends, family, and neighbors who had witnessed this entire exchange. I know many of you have heard whispers and rumors about the accident that took Timothy from us, I said, my voice clear and steady. I know some of you may have wondered if there was more to the story. Let me be clear. My son's death was a tragic accident. The police investigation confirmed this. The only conspiracy here was the one my husband and his mother hatched, to use our child's death as an opportunity to destroy me. I walked over to Timothy's casket and placed my hand gently on the polished wood. Timothy was loved. He was wanted. He was protected and cherished every single day of his life. His death was not anyone's fault, and anyone who tries to use his memory for personal gain will answer to me and to the law. When I turned back to face the room, Marcus was gone. Patricia too. They'd slipped out while I was speaking, probably to begin damage control that would prove futile given what was waiting for them at their respective destinations. The funeral director, who had been standing frozen in shock throughout this entire scene, quietly approached me. Mrs. Whitmore, he said gently, would you like us to proceed with the burial service? I nodded. Yes, please. Timothy deserves to be laid to rest with dignity. And so, we buried my son. But instead of the funeral being a day of humiliation and destruction as Marcus and Patricia had planned, it became something else entirely. It became the day I discovered my own strength. The day I learned I could survive anything. The day I chose myself and my son's memory over the people who would exploit both. Several people approached me after the burial. My sister, who tearfully apologized for believing the whispers she'd heard. Mrs. Chen, who explained that Patricia had been calling neighbors for weeks, spreading rumors about my negligence. Jake, Marcus's college friend, who admitted he'd been concerned about Marcus's behavior, but hadn't known how to address it. I'm so sorry, Caroline, he said. None of us should have let this happen, especially not today. It's not your fault, I told him. This was planned. This was deliberate. And honestly, I'm glad it happened this way. Glad? He asked, confused. I needed to see who my husband really was, I explained. I needed everyone else to see it too. If this had happened privately, he might have convinced people I was lying about his accusations. This way, there are witnesses to his character. And that's exactly what happened over the following weeks. Hit that subscribe button and let me know where you're listening from, because what happened next proved that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people show the world who they really are. The aftermath moved quickly, much faster than I'd expected. Marcus returned to our house that evening to find the locks changed and his belongings packed neatly on the front porch. My lawyer had been busy in the hours following the funeral, filing emergency protective orders and temporary restraining orders that legally required Marcus to stay away from me and our property. He called my phone 63 times that night. I know because I counted each missed call as I deleted them. Then the text messages started. "Caroline, please answer. I can explain everything. This is insane. You're overreacting. Sarah means nothing. It was just a mistake. My mother misunderstood the situation. Please don't destroy our family over this." That last one made me laugh out loud. Alone in the house Marcus and I had bought together when I was pregnant with Timothy. He thought I was destroying our family. After what he'd done, after what he'd planned, he genuinely believed I was the one being unreasonable. By the second day, his tone changed. "You're going to regret this. I'll fight you on everything. No court will believe your story. You'll get nothing in the divorce." By the third day, the desperation was clear. "Caroline, I'm begging you. We can work this out. I'll do anything to fix this. Please call me back. I'm going crazy without you." I never responded to any of them. My lawyer, David Morrison, called me that Wednesday morning with an update. Marcus's employer terminated him yesterday, he informed me. Apparently, they have a morality clause in their executive contracts. An employee planning to file false legal claims while carrying on an affair doesn't meet their standards. "What about Sarah?" I asked. "Also terminated. The company takes a dim view of personal relationships that compromise professional judgment, especially when those relationships involve fraud." I felt a grim satisfaction hearing this. Not because I wanted Marcus to suffer financially, but because there were finally consequences for his actions. "What about the criminal charges?" I asked. David's voice grew more serious. "The district attorney is reviewing everything. The conspiracy to commit fraud is pretty clear-cut given the documentation you gathered. The assault at the funeral was witnessed by dozens of people. And the defamation case is solid since we have proof he knew his accusations were false when he made them publicly. How long before we know something? A few more weeks, probably. But Caroline, I have to tell you, the assault charge alone is going to result in charges. There's no way around that. Too many witnesses, too clear-cut." Patricia, meanwhile, had fled back to Phoenix within 48 hours of the funeral, but not before trying one last desperate gambit. She called my sister Emma on Tuesday night, attempting to convince her that I was having some kind of mental breakdown, that my accusations against Marcus were the product of grief-induced paranoia. "She's not thinking clearly," Patricia told Emma. "She's making up stories about Marcus and that girl from his office. She found some paperwork and misunderstood what it meant. The poor man is just trying to handle their finances during this difficult time." Emma, to her credit, wasn't buying it. "Patricia," she said, "I was at the funeral. I saw Marcus hit Caroline. I heard him accuse her publicly of killing Timothy. There's no misunderstanding that." "He was emotional," Patricia protested. "He's grieving his son." Caroline provoked him with her crazy accusations. "Even if that were true," Emma replied coolly, "nothing provokes a man to hit his wife at their child's funeral. Nothing." Patricia's final attempt to control the narrative had failed. By Thursday, the story had spread throughout our community. Not the version Patricia and Marcus had tried to create, but the truth. People who had attended the funeral were sharing what they'd witnessed. The details about the affair and the planned fraud were becoming common knowledge. I started receiving calls and visits from friends and neighbors I hadn't heard from since the accident. People who apologized for believing the rumors Patricia had been spreading. People who offered support for what I was going through. People who wanted me to know they believed me. They supported me. They were sorry for doubting me. Mrs. Chen came by with a casserole and stayed for tea. "I should have known better," she told me, her eyes wet with tears. "When Patricia called me last month, saying you'd been distracted the day Timothy died, saying you'd been on your phone instead of watching him, I should have known it wasn't true. You were always such a careful mother." "What exactly did she tell you?" I asked. "She said you'd been having problems, that you'd been neglecting Timothy, that you were on dating websites looking for other men. She said Marcus was trying to protect you from criminal charges, but that he couldn't keep covering for you forever." The scope of their campaign against me was becoming clearer. Patricia hadn't just been whispering poison in Marcus's ear. She'd been systematically destroying my reputation throughout our community for weeks before the funeral. She called it preparing people, Mrs. Chen continued. She said when the truth came out about what you'd done, she wanted people to be ready to support Marcus instead of believing your lies. The premeditation was staggering. This wasn't a grieving woman misunderstanding events or a husband lashing out in pain. This was a calculated campaign to isolate me, destroy my credibility, and ensure that when Marcus made his move, public opinion would already be on his side. But their plan had a fatal flaw. They'd underestimated me. Friday morning brought the call I'd been waiting for. "Caroline," David said, "the district attorney's office just called. They're filing charges against Marcus. Assault in the 4th degree for hitting you, criminal conspiracy for the fraud plan, and defamation for the false public accusations about Timothy's death." What does that mean practically? It means he'll be arrested within the next few days. Depending on his cooperation and whether he takes a plea deal, he could face anywhere from 6 months to 3 years in prison. The weight of that information settled over me slowly. My husband of 12 years, the father of my son, was going to jail for what he'd done to me. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt deeply sad. Not sad for Marcus. He'd made his choices and would face the consequences. Sad for what we'd lost, for what we'd never actually had, for the time I'd wasted loving someone who was capable of such cruelty. "There's something else," David continued. "Sarah's been trying to distance herself from the whole situation. Her lawyer called yesterday wanting to make a deal. She's willing to testify against Marcus and Patricia in exchange for immunity from prosecution. What could she tell us that we don't already know? Apparently, quite a bit. She's been recording conversations with Marcus for months, including ones where he discussed the plan to frame you for negligence. She's got him on tape saying things like, 'Once Caroline's out of the picture, and the insurance money will set us up nicely.' Insurance money, of course. Timothy's life insurance policy was substantial, enough to start a new life with a new woman, if one could figure out how to access it, without the inconvenience of a grieving widow who might ask questions. She also has evidence that Patricia's been involved since the beginning," David added. "Phone calls, text messages, even some emails about the Caroline problem and how to handle the situation." The Caroline problem. That's what I'd become to them. Not a grieving mother, not a woman who'd lost her child, not a wife who deserved honesty and compassion. A problem to be solved. An obstacle to be removed. That evening, I sat in Timothy's room for the first time since the funeral. Marcus had wanted to pack it up immediately after the accident, but I hadn't been ready. Now, surrounded by my son's toys and books and clothes, I finally understood why. I'd needed to grieve Timothy without the contamination of Marcus's lies. I'd needed to remember my son without the weight of false guilt. I'd needed to love my child's memory without someone telling me I didn't deserve to. Looking at Timothy's drawings on the wall, pictures of our family, our house, his friends, his dreams for when he grew up, I realized that protecting his memory had been worth everything I'd endured. These drawings showed a happy child, a loved child, a child who felt safe and cherished right up until the tragic accident that took him from us. That's the truth Patricia and Marcus had tried to destroy. That's what I'd fought to preserve. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was David. "Caroline, I'm sorry to call so late, but I wanted you to know before you heard it elsewhere. Marcus was arrested about an hour ago at Sarah's apartment." I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, closure, and something that might have been pity. "How is he?" According to the arresting officers, not well. Apparently, he broke down completely when they put the handcuffs on. Started crying, saying he was sorry, that he'd made a mistake, that he loved you and Timothy. Too little, too late. But at least it was something approaching the truth. "His bail hearing is Monday," David continued. "Given the assault charge and the flight risk, Sarah apparently had tickets for them to fly to Mexico this weekend. I doubt he'll get bail approved." Mexico. They'd been planning to run away together while I dealt with the legal and financial devastation they'd left in their wake. "There's one more thing," David said. "Patricia's been arrested too." This surprised me. I'd expected her to claim ignorance, to say she was just a concerned mother-in-law trying to help her grieving son. What's the charge? Turns out conspiracy to commit fraud is a federal offense when it crosses state lines. Since she was coordinating the plan from Arizona while Marcus was executing it here, the FBI got involved. She was picked up at her home in Phoenix this afternoon. I hung up the phone and sat in the growing darkness of Timothy's room, processing everything that had happened over the past week. 7 days ago, I'd been a grieving mother preparing to bury her child alongside the husband she thought loved her. Tonight, I was a woman who discovered her own strength, protected her son's memory, and ensured that the people who tried to destroy her would face justice. It wasn't the ending anyone could have predicted, but it was the ending I'd chosen, the ending I'd fought for, the ending Timothy deserved. Before I go, make sure you've subscribed to this channel and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Because there's one more part to this story. What happened when Marcus and I came face to face again? 3 months after Timothy's funeral, I sat across from Marcus in a sterile conference room at the county jail. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled to a chain around his waist. The man who'd once been my husband looked like he'd aged a decade in 12 weeks. His bail had been denied, as David had predicted. The flight risk was too high, the charges too serious. Patricia was in federal custody in Arizona, also denied bail. Sarah had taken her plea deal and was in witness protection, having provided enough evidence to ensure both Marcus and his mother would spend significant time in prison. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said when I sat down across from him. His voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't respond immediately. I studied his face, looking for any trace of the man I'd once loved, the father who'd adored Timothy, the husband who'd promised to love me through anything. "Why?" I finally asked. He looked up at me with eyes that were red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep or both. "Why what? Why all of it? The affair? The plan to destroy me? The lies about Timothy's death? Why didn't you just ask for a divorce if you were so unhappy?" Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at his shackled hands on the metal table between us. "I don't know," he said eventually. "I honestly don't know how it got so far out of hand." That's not an answer. He looked up at me then, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't seen in months. Vulnerability, remorse, the recognition of what he'd lost. "It started before Timothy died," he admitted. "The affair with Sarah, I mean. I was feeling trapped, unhappy, like I'd made a mistake getting married so young. But I loved Timothy, and I couldn't imagine leaving him." The irony of that statement wasn't lost on either of us. "When the accident happened," he continued, "I was devastated, but I was also relieved, in a way. Relieved that the decision about leaving was made for me. Sarah and I could be together without me having to choose between her and my son." Hearing him say it out loud was somehow worse than reading it in the text messages. The casualness with which he discussed our child's death as a convenience still took my breath away. But then what? I was still there, still grieving, still your wife. "My mother convinced me that it was your fault," he said, his voice getting smaller. "She said if you'd been a better mother, more attentive, Timothy would still be alive. She said you deserved to lose everything because you'd cost us our son through your carelessness." "And you believed her?" "I wanted to believe her," he admitted. "It was easier than accepting that sometimes terrible things just happen. It was easier than dealing with my guilt about the affair, about how I'd been planning to leave even before Timothy died." I felt a surge of anger at his selfishness, but also something like pity for how thoroughly he'd destroyed his own life. The plan to blame me for negligence, to sue me, to take everything in the divorce, that was all Patricia's idea? Marcus shook his head. "No, that was mine. Once I convinced myself you were responsible for Timothy's death, it seemed fair, like justice. You'd taken my son from me, so you deserved to lose everything else." The twisted logic was stunning. In his mind, I'd become the villain of a story he'd rewritten to absolve himself of guilt and responsibility. And the slap at the funeral? He winced. "Mom told me you'd been crying fake tears, that you were putting on a show for sympathy while planning to take me for everything in the divorce. She said you were probably already seeing someone new, that you were relieved Timothy was gone because now you could start over without the burden of a child. Each accusation was more vicious than the last, but they revealed the depths of Patricia's manipulation and Marcus's willingness to believe the worst of me. Did you ever stop to think any of it might not be true? I asked. No, he whispered. I didn't want it to be true. I wanted you to be the bad guy because it made everything else easier to live with. We sat in silence for several minutes. I watched this man who'd shared 12 years of my life, who'd held my hand during Timothy's birth, who'd once promised to love me forever, and tried to reconcile him with the person who'd orchestrated my destruction. What happens now? He asked eventually. Now you serve your time, I said. The DA offered you a plea deal. 7 years if you plead guilty to all charges. David says you should take it because if you go to trial and lose, you could get 15. I meant what happens to you. I considered the question. What did happen to me now? I was 39 years old, widowed and divorced, and starting completely over. I'm selling the house, I told him. Too many memories, good and bad. I'm moving closer to my sister in Oregon. I'm going back to school to finish my master's degree in social work. That's good, he said, and he seemed to mean it. You'd be good at that. I'm also starting a foundation in Timothy's name for children's safety education and grief counseling for families who've lost children to accidents. This seemed to hit him hard. His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment he looked like the man who'd sobbed in my arms the night Timothy died. He would have liked that, Marcus managed to say. Yes, he would have. Caroline, he said, leaning forward slightly. I know I don't have the right to ask this, but do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I'd been expecting this question, and I'd thought carefully about my answer. I forgive the man who had an affair because he was unhappy, I said slowly. I forgive the father who is devastated by his son's death. I even forgive the husband who wanted a divorce but didn't know how to ask for one. He looked hopeful for a moment, but I will never forgive the man who tried to blame me for our son's death. I will never forgive the person who planned to destroy me financially and emotionally for his own convenience. And I will never forgive the coward who hit me at our child's funeral. The hope in his eyes died. Those aren't the actions of someone I ever loved, I continued. Those are the actions of a stranger, someone I never really knew despite living with him for 12 years. I understand, he said quietly. I hope you do. I hope you understand that there are consequences for our choices, and some things can't be undone or forgiven or fixed. You chose to believe lies about me rather than face the truth about yourself. You chose to try to profit from our son's death rather than grieve it honestly. You chose to destroy rather than heal. I stood to leave. Caroline, wait, he said. Can I ask you to do something for me? I turned back to face him. Will you visit Timothy's grave sometimes? Will you tell him? Will you tell him his father loved him? For the first time during our conversation, my composure cracked. Tears filled my eyes as I thought about our beautiful boy, sleeping peacefully in the cemetery while his father sat in jail for trying to exploit his death. I visit him every week, I said. I bring him flowers and tell him about my day. I read him books and sing him songs. I tell him how much I love him and how proud I am to be his mother. Thank you, Marcus whispered. But I won't tell him his father loved him, I continued, because I don't know if that's true anymore. Someone who loved Timothy wouldn't have used his death this way. Someone who loved Timothy would have honored his memory, not desecrated it. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back one final time. If you want Timothy to know his father loved him, you'll have to find a way to prove it. You'll have to spend whatever years you have left becoming someone worthy of that love. You'll have to earn the right to claim it. How? He asked desperately. I don't know, I said honestly, but it's not my job to figure out your redemption for you. It's not my job to absolve you or guide you or make this easier for you. You created this situation, Marcus. You'll have to find your own way out of it. I left him sitting there in that sterile room, crying into his shackled hands. I felt no satisfaction in his pain, no joy in his downfall. I felt only a deep sadness for what we'd all lost. Timothy, our family, the future we'd planned, the people we used to be. But I also felt something else as I walked out of that jail and into the bright afternoon sunshine. I felt free. free from the lies that had been told about me, free from the guilt I'd been carrying, free from the marriage that had become a prison, free from people who would use my love against me, who would exploit my grief for their own gain. For the first time since Timothy's death, I felt like I could breathe again. That evening, I visited Timothy's grave as I did every week. I brought fresh flowers, daffodils, his favorite because they looked like sunshine, he'd told me once, and I sat beside his headstone as the sun set over the cemetery. "Hi, baby," I whispered, arranging the flowers in the small vase. "Mama's here." I told him about my week, about the house showing that had gone well, about the letter I'd gotten from the university accepting me into their graduate program. I told him about the foundation paperwork I was filing, about how we were going to help other families who'd lost children like we'd lost him. And then, because I'd promised to always be honest with him, I told him about visiting his father. "Daddy made some very bad choices," I explained, my voice soft in the gathering darkness. "He hurt Mama very badly, and he has to face the consequences for that. But I want you to know that none of what happened between Daddy and me had anything to do with you." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree above his grave, and I chose to believe it was Timothy listening. "You were perfect, sweetheart. You were loved every single day of your life. The accident that took you from us wasn't anyone's fault. Not yours, not mine, not anyone's. Sometimes terrible things just happen, and all we can do is love each other through them." I stayed until full darkness fell, talking to my son about everything and nothing, about the future I was building in his memory, and the peace I was finally finding in his absence. As I walked back to my car, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, devastated by loss, betrayed by the people closest to me, nearly destroyed by their cruelty and lies. That woman had found strength she didn't know she possessed. She'd fought back when fighting seemed impossible. She'd protected what mattered most, even when everything else was falling apart. I was proud of her. I was proud of me. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that we're stronger than we know and that justice sometimes comes in unexpected forms, please hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And tell me about a time you had to fight for yourself when no one else would. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply refuse to let other people's lies become our truth. Sometimes the best revenge is living well, loving deeply, and never letting anyone else's cruelty change who we are at our core. Timothy's memory lives on in the foundation that bears his name, in the families we've helped navigate their grief, in the safety programs that have prevented other accidents like his. His death wasn't in vain, because it led to something beautiful and meaningful and lasting. And his mother, the woman they tried to destroy, she not only survived, she thrived. Marcus served 6 years of his 7-year sentence before being released on parole. Patricia served 4 years in federal prison. Sarah disappeared into witness protection, and I never heard from her again. As for me, I finished my master's degree, moved to Oregon near my sister's family, and found work as a grief counselor specializing in families who've lost children. I help people navigate the worst days of their lives, and I'm good at it because I've been there. I know what it feels like when your world ends, and I know what it takes to build a new one from the ashes. I never remarried, but I found love again. Love for myself, for my work, for the life I built after everything fell apart. I learned that sometimes the most profound healing comes not from getting back what you lost, but from discovering what you're capable of when you have to save yourself. Timothy would be 13 now if he'd lived. I imagine he'd be tall like his father, stubborn like his mother, probably playing soccer and collecting something ridiculous like bottle caps or Pokemon cards. I imagine he'd roll his eyes at my jokes and hug me extra tight when I was sad. I imagine a lot of things that will never be, but I don't imagine them with sadness anymore. I imagine them with gratitude for the 7 years, 3 months, and 16 days I got to be his mother. That's my story. That's how I survived the worst thing that ever happened to me, and how I built something beautiful from the wreckage left behind. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing me when others didn't. And thank you for understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply refuse to break. Subscribe for more stories like this, and remember, you're stronger than you know.